Hello everybody and welcome to my video. Today I'm going to be discussing how I made a jig so that I can cut hexagonal blanks on my table saw. It's a relatively simple jig. I'll go through the process of how I've made it. I'm going to sit down here and show the basics of how it operates, and then the second half of the video is going to be me using it so you can actually see it in action. I'll go over a couple of things that I've learned through the process and what I think are some of the best practices with it. So the simple thing of the jig is it's just a sled that's going to ride on my fence with my table saw, and it sets a 30-degree from the upright angle to correspond with the blade sitting at, sorry for the light, that didn't help, setting for the blade going at another 30 degrees. It'll give you kind of a little area for the hexagon to sit in. And then this being a sled means that you can slide it up and down your fence to help push the piece through safely, and that's what this little handle on the end is for. If you can see that, it actually sits there to push the piece through. The other thing you're going to need is a safety tool to help hold the piece in place. Let me go grab that real quick. So I took a pushing tool and I cut a notch out of it so that it's kind of fingered, and you can use this to help with pushing down on the pieces and still using it as it was originally designed, but it adds that one more degree that you can use to help hold these pieces in place, especially when you're closer to the blade, which is going to happen in a couple of the spots. Now the same technique, move in a little bit here, same technique can be used to make 5, 7, and 8-sided blanks. You'll just need a separate jig. One of the things I'm going to do with my jig in the future, I'm going to add the ability to actually move it up and down to a certain degree within the angles that I actually need it to, with a couple set points so that I can use it for the different sizes. 90 degrees, you can already do that with your fence, and anything beyond a 8-sided piece, you're going to need more than 45 degrees, and that's going to depend on your table saw. Mine will only go to 45, so that's where my limit's going to be. But as I was saying, simple process. This is a side view of the sled itself. It's just a nice little 30 degree from the 90 offset to help hold your piece, and then the runner to go across your fence. I've got a Pro Shop 2, so I'm able to put little runners on the inside of it used to help guide it down the fence evenly. Other half of it is you're going to be setting your blade to 30 degrees from the 90. That's going to give you this little 60-degree cutoff on the edge. So one of the first tricks to this is you're going to need your first two edges to be pretty close to 90 degrees on each other and smooth. Those are going to be your first two cutting surfaces, and you're going to do it without the jig. You're going to run it against the fence itself. So your fence will be sitting here, your table saw base will be sitting here, and your blade is going to make this first cut here. How far up and down you cut to is going to determine how much of the material you use. It's also going to help determine the length of your sides and your overall diameter. There is a website I found to help with calculating these based off of the information. So if you want a certain diameter, it'll tell you how long each of the sides, how long the side needs to be, and that's going to be useful because the side is what you're going to be using for setting your distance between your sled and your blade. And that website is, I have way too many open. Omni Calculator. So as you can see here, you can use these different dimensions. Usually you want to know what your outside diameter is going to be. You may want to know what your minor radius is going to be so you can know your minor diameter. But you can just put in, I want my side to be 1 inch, and it tells you the different dimensions on here. So side A is what I want. To be 1 inch. My overall diameter is going to be 2 inches. Now say I want to set to a certain diameter, this will let me figure out what my side A is going to be without having to do it. I mean, it's not difficult calculations, but every tool you have is a tool you can use. And again, that's Omni Calculator. I have nothing to do with them. I found this online with a search, and from the looks of it, they can also have calculators for different polygons out there, so it'll be useful for those as well. Alright, back to it. So we're going to do that first cut on the 90. We're going to set the distance from the fence to your blade to determine how high up this cut is going to be. You're going to want it pretty close to what you want that side to be. It is better to go a little bit over than under. Under, you'll end up with a flat piece on there that you can't use, and you'll have to cut it again. You go a little bit over though, you got to watch out, especially if you're maximizing the amount of the piece that you're trying to use. If you go too far, you won't be able to fully cut the piece. You'll end up cutting something short. So try and get that close. You can make a couple passes to get it to where you want it in by easing it in. But once you get that first cut, that's where the sled's going to come in. Because we're going to take this face and we're going to turn the piece. You can see here I have it numbered, and I did that while I was cutting it. So there's your base, there's the first cut you make. I'm going to rotate the piece so that first cut is on the base. This side is now going to be against the sled, and this is the side that's going to be cut. This is where you're going to set that distance between the base of your blade and the base of your sled to determine that side length that you want. And once again, you can work it in a little bit to figure out what you need. I have actually gone through a couple iterations where I'm trying to find the right size I want and moved it in. Like making a handle, and you want to know where it feels right, you start a little bit big and you start working it in. And you'll see that on the second half of the video where I start back over again because it wasn't turning out the size that I wanted it to be. So you're going to turn your piece. Set side number 1 on the base, side number 6 on the side of your fence, and remember you're going to turn counterclockwise. It does not work except for like the one shot in whatever fraction of being able to do it. Going counterclockwise is what you need to do to be able to consistently get this to work. And then after that, it's a matter of turning it around to each of the faces until you get back to your side number 6. That's also where this tool is going to come in handy. You're going to come close to the blade at a couple spots with some of these cuts. The pusher on the sled helps out significantly with this, and being able to push a piece from an odd angle while the blade's making, say, this cut right here, it's going to be extending out this way. And that's going to be really close to where you're going to be working. So be cognizant of that while you're doing this. You need to have bigger pieces aren't quite as big of a concern. The smaller ones get a little bit more touchy. I have another jig that I put a video together on for my lathe where I can hook a trim router up to it and cut blanks on there as well. There's benefits and downsides to both of these. We'll go over some of those in a moment. So once I finish my first rotation, I then take the piece and flip it over and go through again without changing any settings. This is going to end up being kind of like a spring pass. You may want to do it a couple times depending on how much your sled, your insert plate, or your blade may flex while doing this work. I did notice that my zero clearance insert plate, and I did make one for 30 degrees in order to work with these smaller pieces. I noticed that it was giving a little bit, so I had to reinforce it later, but it just meant that I had to go through a couple different spring passes to make sure everything ended up even. Once you're done with that, that's it. You now have a hexagon blank to use. I've used them in glue ups. I've got a video short where I've glued up several pieces and then cut them out and made a gavel. I've used a piece to cut out a London pattern tool handle once you've already got the hexagons in. Usually I see people cutting out the flats after the fact. I think starting from this works out well. I'm planning on turning this into a lathe tool handle. Not really certain what this was going to be for the project that will be in the second half of this video. I ended up using a second piece and starting over again, but that doesn't mean this isn't good. I could actually go through and cut this down if I wanted to, using the sled to make a smaller hexagon if I wanted to, but in its form it may actually prove useful for something, and we'll see about that later. Another thing I've done is I've cut angles on it. I made little honeycomb patterns out of these. I don't know if you can see those, but I'll cut miter angles out of each of these and made a little honeycomb. You'll see that in the short on the gavel as well, because that's the clacker that goes under the gavel. Now, one of the downsides is this is probably not the best process if you're doing center turning, like making pins or something like that, because the problem is after you've cut this hexagon, then you've got to drill down the center precisely, and I can't do that. Especially when you get the bits long enough to actually make this full distance. They do tend to flex even if you drill in from both sides. And you never quite seem to get directly in the center, which is kind of what you want when you're going to be doing center work on these afterwards. I think if you're going to be doing center work on the lathe, the other jig is probably the better process to use for something like that. But for glue ups, for handles, and other projects like that, I think this is actually a really good process for turning out hexagons, and I'm actually looking forward to modifying my jig so that I can cut a couple different patterns out of it. Nice pentagonal handle. Not really certain I'm going to go up to an octagonal, but we'll see. But hopefully this helps. I think I've covered most of the lessons I've learned here, which is go counterclockwise, do a spring pass, have the guard and pusher on the sled, have the safety tool, make sure you start on your fence to get the 90 to get the first cut, and then use the sled afterwards after that. And I will see y'all in a few moments. I'm actually going to go back in time and start showing how I put one of these together. It ended up being a little bit smaller so that it felt better in the hand, because it ended up being the handle for the gavel glue up that I was talking about, where I took these and put them together. Any comments, questions, or concerns? Something you think could be done better about the jig, about the process, or even my video? Let me know down in the videos. I do enjoy some constructive feedback. I like to be able to learn from things, and I'm sure I am not the first person to come up with this idea, but as far as I've found so far, I may be the first person to actually put it on YouTube. So, fingers crossed on that. And I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Hello everyone, and welcome to my video on making hexagon blanks on the table saw without any math. I came up with a sled to use with my fence that allows me to set a 30-degree angle combined with a 30-degree angle on the table saw blade and give you the perfect size. You can use this freehand with a couple tricks. There is, of course, a trick to using it, which I'll go over in more detail. Some of the other things I've done, in addition to the sled, is I made a zero clearance insert plate with a 30-degree cutout on it. Not necessary for real larger pieces, but for smaller pieces, such as this one, it came in a great deal of use. I've also produced a number of these that I used as a glue up for a project I'm working on. And this piece of purple heart is going to be for a lathe tool handle that I'll turn kind of into a London pattern style at some point in the future. But for right now, I'm making a London pattern handle for a gavel I'm making, and I'm going to use this piece of black walnut. One of the tricks, one other thing, is I modified this push stick so that it has fingers on it. See a little V cut out there, and you'll see where that comes in handy for holding down on the edges of some of these angles. So one of the first things you need to do is you need to make sure at least two of your sides are relatively square to each other. And these are going to be the two first faces you use for setting up and cutting. When you do that, you're going to set it up with just the fence and the blade at 30 degrees. And you're going to set that up so that you'll actually cut approximately halfway onto the blank, or depending on the size of polygon that you want to actually cut out, is going to be more or less. You always want to go at or a little bit more than what your final length of a side is going to be. I found a website, Omni Calculator, that helps out with figuring out if you know what your diameter is going to be, that it'll tell you what a side needs to be for measurements. This is just going to be 1-inch sides. So you'll cut your first 30-degree piece, and then after that, I recommend marking it, you're going to turn it counterclockwise. It makes a difference. I had a couple of failed attempts trying to figure out how to make it go where intuitively clockwise, but you actually wanted to go counterclockwise. The second and following cuts are going to be made with a sled that I'll show in just a moment. And you'll go all the way around. And then I recommend a second pass, kind of a skim cut. You don't need to make any adjustments. There's going to be some variation in it as you've worked, and you'll feel it and hear it cut a little bit extra off of each of the sides just to true it up. And then this is my sled. You can see it's got the 38-degree face. This is Mark II. When I make Mark III, this face is actually going to go all the way down to the table saw bed, and this piece will be recessed behind it. All it is an edge to set up against the fence, 2 runners to ride in my fence itself so I can push it evenly without any distortion, and a pushing handle that's also going to push the blank forward. You can see where it knocks out a little bit of the edge there on it. And that will work in there, and you'll see me move it forward and backwards with each of the cuts. As I said, first cut, it's going to be with a fence alone. So we'll get that set up. And that's going to be about halfway through my piece, since it is one of those angle cuts. And you can put it through again if you need to. It'd help if I had a second pusher. Alright, I'm going to move the camera a little bit. It's a little easier to work around. There we go. I'm actually going to back that out a little bit so I can work my way in to where I want it. Let's just double check myself. Alright, time for trial number 2. You actually want to cut up to about halfway point, or whatever the size of the side you're going to want out of your piece. I cut that last piece too narrow, so we're going to do it again. And we're going to go up just a wee bit more. You can work this in increments until you get the size of the side you want. That's where the fingers come in handy. Alright, that's right about where I want that. Now for the next step. Power removed. This is another spot where the zero clearance fence comes in handy. And as before, you can work this in even after you've made the hexagon. You can step it in if you need to. Here we go. Let's mark down side number 1. And now we'll start working counterclockwise. As you can see, that sets flush on the table. This side's going to set flush against the fence. And I'll be using the fingers to push in and against. And it looks like I'm going to have to raise my table saw blade just a touch more. That should come all the way through. Clear. Power. Did not like the grain on that side. Let's sweep that through a second time. Clear. Much better. Here. Yep. It looks a little bit off. I may have been a little bit shallow on my first setting cut, but that's where we can ease up on it. Let's start off there. Clear it. Alright, still a little bit bigger than I would like. I'm going to work this down quite a bit more. But that shows you how you can put it together. How to use the sled. Remember, the first cut's going to be with just the fence to set an angle. Sled afterwards to set all of the other angles. Work counterclockwise. And as you can see, I numbered most of the sides so that I could keep track of where I was at. And I followed up with a skim pass on each side, as you could hear. And I actually moved it a little bit. Probably take that down a bit more. And this is the website I was talking about, Omni Calculator, their hexagon calculator. So if you know what your edge-to-edge diameter, what you want it to be, the angle, your dimension you're setting on the fence is A, your side. If you know what your long diameter needs to be, you can set that in there. That's 1 3/16. And I know, trying to convert that back, higher level math, or you can just use a digital micrometer. There we go, close enough. Oh, +1. And I'll put a link to that in the description. If this helps someone, I plan on making this for 5-sided pentagonal blanks, maybe 7-sided, 8-sided, 9-sided. I don't think it'd go much more than that, because at that point in time it's just going to be round. But it give you a little bit of variety to work with glue ups as well as turning. I have another video where I have a router jig for my sled that I can use to set these angles. That's better for center turning, like pins where you've already drilled out the center and you know where that is. Here I'm going to have to figure out the center and drill out relatively closely. I would not use this or this for a pin blank unless I am absolutely certain my drill could get that centered really well. This, I've got a trick I'm going to try out. I'm actually going to turn it on centers for a flat spot and then use that with a steady rest to be able to work out the drilling and then the rest of the shaping. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comments. If you think this will help somebody else who might find it interesting, please share it. Thank you all. Have a good day.